Vital Hoops is for the culture.
Peace, Jumbo. Welcome to the VITAL HOOPS Podcast. My name is Fernando Cardenas, aka International XB. I am your host. This is episode number 46. Now, this episode will be divided in two parts. This is part one. And in my opinion, our guest is one of the most important Pan-Africanist voices today. He is a revolutionary Pan-Africanist, an atheist, a socialist, and a vegan. He's the host of the Bro Diallo Show, the co-host of Rational Radicals with the great Pan-Africanist rapper Skip Coon, also the co-host of Earn Your Liberation with Dr. Jared Ball and Geechee Y'all. Our guest today is Diallo Kenyatta. All right. Bro Diallo, aka Diallo Kenyatta, aka the Great of Pan-Africanism. Welcome to the VITAL HOOPS Podcast. How you doing?
I'm well. Thanks for the invite.
Listen, I really appreciate you, taking the time to be here. I've learned a lot from you. I definitely do watch all three of the shows, the Bro Diallo Show, the Rational Radicals, and the Earn Your Liberation. So I've been trying to get on live, but I'm usually at work when you guys are on live because I'm all the way in France, so the timing is not
Okay.
But definitely I appreciate your work for sure. I've been learning a lot listening to your show now for about I think a couple of years it's been now.
Wow.
And and I appreciate you taking the time.
All right. I appreciate you too. I'm really glad you looked out. I'm glad that the struggle, Pan-African struggle, is really a Pan-African struggle, especially when the African diaspora can unite and engage in dialogue. I think that's very necessary.
Yeah, without a doubt. Yeah. I'm Afro-Cuban, but I live in France now, and the organization that I work with, the Pan-African League, Umoja, we just had the Pan-African universities over here, and that we organized, and we had Inem Richardson over here from the All African People Revolutionary Party.
Mm-hmm.
We had Dr. Tommy Curry.
Okay.
Yeah, it was good. We had a brother named Luc Renette from the Guadeloupe anti-imperialist armed struggle.
Okay.
And
nice.
Yeah, definitely. And so it was very interesting. It was a good build, really good build.
Yeah.
And so that's what we've been working on this side, definitely. Before we get into some serious stuff, I want to ask you about your game, man. I know you play basketball. I know you don't like ball chases, but I know you got game. I hear you talking here and there. You know what I mean? Do you still play?
Not like I used to. I might throw the ball around with my sons, but yeah, I used to play a little bit. But I've never, even though I'm when I attack ball chasing, I think sports are very important. Competitive sports, individual sports where you test yourself and compete against yourself, endurance. I engage in sports and I appreciate sports. I don't like the sports industry.
I know. I
from
understand.
the collegiate level and especially the professional level.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't in any way.
I understand.
If you find any areas where I'm bragging about my game, just delete that footage. I'm a practitioner. I'm a fan of the game on a community level, and I think all sports need to be democratized and embedded within community, not a capitalist industry of exploitation of bodies, mainly African bodies across the globe. So,
no doubt.
But I would rate, if I had a scale of 1 to 10 to rate my game, I'd give myself a solid 3. And the whole 3 is based. I'm 6'3", so that's all.
Okay. So you got a little bit of height.
I got height. That's all I got, and I uses it. I probably overused it, so I didn't have to learn how to dribble or shoot or nothing because I was 6'3", so I just stand there with my arms up.
Right. All right, so I want to start with some basic stuff. Like, even though this is a Pan-Africanist show, in my opinion, you're one of the most important voices right now.
Oh, thank you.
You know, in
I appreciate
Pan-Africanism, really. And so I wanted to ask you, you know, in your words, if you could define Pan-Africanism and the importance of it today, you know, in 2023, as we're coming up on 2024, because I still hear a lot of criticism of Pan-Africanism and people saying that it's utopia, or it's, you know, it's not, it's a thing of the past, and, you know, things like that. So if you could please.
Well, there's the Pan-African ideology and then the Pan-African agenda. The Pan-African ideology is the acknowledgement of the common heritage of all and interconnectedness of all African people across the globe. People of African descent, our common history, and how even though they are extremely diverse cultures, but every culture that can be defined as an African culture, one that sustains and advances African people. The Pan-African agenda is simply utilizing that commonality, that historical, that racial, biological, phenotypical, political um, commonality in order as an organizational point or as a springboard for African people. So we can organize and use that as a fulcrum. So we can define everything that we do or seek to do, everything that comes into us or all of our outputs on how does it speak to the interests, the well-being, and the dignity of African people. So one is acknowledging, because it's there, whether you acknowledge it or not. So it is simply acknowledging the interconnectedness of all African people across the globe. And number two, being able to act on that acknowledgement, constructing organizations, principles, values, and even strategies and tactics for conflicts, and strategies and tactics for resolving conflicts, especially internal conflicts for African people. So it's an ideology and an agenda of unifying and using that unity as a source of power and a engine of liberation.
Yeah, I appreciate that. All right. So let's talk about this when it comes to, you know, Abrahamic religions, right? I've heard you speak a lot on this topic, and here in France, where I am, it's a tough subject, right? Because a lot of the brothers and sisters here are from, you know, where most of our ancestors are from, which is West Africa, and a lot of the brothers and sisters are usually Muslims, and it can cause some tension, right? But personally, I agree with you on everything that you speak on when it comes to Abrahamic religion, right? Because from what I've read, from what I've learned throughout the years, I know how horribly our people were impacted. It was one of the main tools that was used, right? One of the main tools of oppression that was used, and that is still all over our people today, right?
Right.
But what I wanted to ask you about was more so the spiritual part, right? Like when it comes to the traditional African spirituality, like Ifa and things like that, right? Because from my understanding, I feel like a lot of this spirituality, it was kind of embedded within our culture, without that, like our ancestors, the way they used to live, right? Like, and from my understanding, it was like kind of all mixed in, whether we were talking science, you know, mathematics and spirituality, all these things were kind of like intertwined, and the way our ancestors moved forward was kind of like within that spiritual realm, right? That's kind of my understanding. So I would love for you to expand a little bit on that, because you don't see things that way, right? You don't see that African spirituality bringing anything positive to our people today, or how do you feel about that?
I don't think that I couldn't say blanketly that African spirituality brings nothing positive to our people, but I can say that if you put African spirituality, the existence of African deities, or the interpretation that African ancestors are in some type of extra dimensional realm, or that our ancestors can have some type of material impact on us from that some special realm, or be evoked. Just the concepts of magic, things of that nature, it doesn't stand up to scrutiny any more than the Western religions.
Mm.
I do have a great appreciation, and I do engage with myths, folklore, fantasies, and rituals. I don't think that a myth, folklore, fantasy, or ritual can be inherently good or bad. You
Okay.
have some that are good and some that are bad. You have some that are alien, foreign, colonial. You have some that are indigenous. You have some that are rituals, fantasies, folklore that are liberatory, and some that are oppressive. So I am willing to engage with, and I don't out and out reject African spirituality from the arena that these stories help us to understand our or comprehend or relate to
Mhm.
eternity, to kinship, to time and space, the immenseness of time and space, and while we're relatively minuscule, the rituals that help to ground and connect us. So I am critical, because if you really look at many of these um, traditional African spiritual practices, they also devolve into cultism, exploitation,
Right.
and a lot of times they distract or derail African people. It's not positive. I do know, and I've talked to some brothers who consult oracles, who have erect shrines to the ancestors or orishas, and they put their, for lack of a better term, faith in those magical materials, magical thinking, otherworldly and mystical drives, and there's nothing coming from that. So we invest so much energy and resources and have little to nothing in return except for make believe and further entrenching us in delusions. They can also make us vulnerable. Many of the African superstitions and many of the African rituals and myths that our ancestors believed in, when colonizers would come to our shores and would violate those rituals, we would be under the misconception that their gods were more powerful than their gods. If they eat something from an accursed or banned substance, or if they drink from a cursed lake, or if they enter into a cursed region, and they don't, and the ancestors or the Orisha do not act upon them. And we also see that even in Egypt, where there are several here in the United States, many Kemetic cults,
Right, right.
where these individuals will go and get Kemetic teachings,
Mhm.
uh, and get Kemetic dress or garb and symbols, and give themselves the names of our ancestors and construct entire cults around that,
Yes.
and monetarily, sexually, and socially exploit whole populations of people, because the Egyptians did believe in divine rulership and things of that nature. So you have men who that I know of, that I've been to some of their compounds or whatever. Probably one of the most notable, this predator by the name of Malachi Z. York. He
Yeah, I've
went
heard of
into
I've heard of it.
Georgia and erected pyramids and erected giant ankhs and had sarcophagi and was wearing, Kemetic royal and headdresses, and had people taking on ancient Kemetic names and practices, all for the purpose of hyper exploitation. So
Yeah.
even African spirituality can be used for exploitation
Yeah,
or
yeah, yeah.
riches.
Yeah.
So, and I've been surrounded, since I engaged the liberation struggle. I've been surrounded by individuals and communities that have embraced traditional African practices,
Mhm.
calling down the ancestors and the elders, pouring libations.
Mhm.
But you'll go and end up to a place where our people are pouring libations to Barack Obama, or pouring libations to Colin Powell, and calling
Right.
Colin Powell a great ancestor.
Oh,
So when you leave the realm of reason, logic, evidence, and critique and skepticism, I just think that you've become very vulnerable. Even
yeah.
if even if you put that aside. When you get into the arena of the supernatural, the arena of faith and belief, there's just so many vulnerabilities there. So I think that it's more healthy for African people to approach our spirituality from a critical, skeptical, and academic point of view, as opposed to from a faith and belief point of view.
Yeah. I understand what you're saying. Well, as far as the business side in Cuba, the IFA part is very big, right? So, but now what we're seeing is they're mainly white Cubans that have been taking that over, right? And now they're babalaos. Like they weren't even, and now they're making businesses out of that.
You
like,
find that
business.
on
Yeah. It's just business.
Well, I mean, even here in the States, and maybe not so much in the smaller areas, but you go to places with large Afro Caribbean or Afro Latino populations, and you go to, I'm sure you're from, I don't know if you're familiar with the Botanicas.
Yeah.
You know, and where people are not going into these places to call on our ancestors and get instruments to set up shrines to call on our ancestors to strengthen us in our struggle. They're calling on ancestors to eliminate a coworker or a competitor to make their business more profitable for the next quarter.
That's what they're asking. They're asking for things like that. And also another problem that I had with it a few years back, I asked our babalao why, because in Cuba there's still this, at one point they used to call on Spanish saints, but they were really calling on orishas, but they mixed up the names, and it was like coding, right? So they would be like, Santa Barbara, but really they were praying to Shango, so they would call on another one. But then what happens today is that we kept on using those names, and a lot of people are still using the Catholic saints names, you know what I mean? And I'm like, yo, so why are we still doing this? Let's stop that. Like, why are we? And then a lot of people would tell me, well, it's been so many years and everything is intertwined, so we can't really go back to. And then they're making people get baptized. Yeah, it's contaminated. They're making people get baptized in Catholic Church in order to get work done as for Ifa, right? So
that's cultural contamination. And that's also the nature of, because I mean, in it's not unique to African spirituality. I mean, if you look at Catholicism or Eastern Orthodox, the oldest Christian churches in Europe, you'll find a lot of pagan rituals, pagan symbols that were integrated into it. But when you have two cultures that come together, but it's not like a mutual sharing, but a dominant culture superimposing itself on an oppressed or exploited culture, then it's not really a sharing or a merger. It's an exploitation, a dilution, or even a destruction of the core elements of it. So when I see that, and that's why they call it Santeria, and you go into the Botanicas, and you see the 7-day candles and things of that nature, and you'll have a white saint surrounded by cowrie shells. But I call that cultural contamination. And really, if we're going to, it should be a reformation, a purging of those slave and colonial components to our rituals and our myth and folklore and spiritual systems and religions.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. All right, I want to talk about this. This here is important. Many times I run into sisters, they're brilliant sisters, right? We would talk like climate change. We'll talk, I'm talking about my wife also. My wife is like that, right? We talk climate change. We, the whole eco side that's going on. We even talk, about negritude. We talk about African liberation, everything. But some sisters, they don't identify with Pan-Africanism for some reason. And even though, like, when I speak to them, I see they're right in there with us. Like, you know what I mean? Like, they're in.
Right.
And so I wanted to ask you a little bit more about this. I've heard you talk about feminism and about how, basically regular feminism, or what we call white feminism or whatever, is about basically is integrationism, right? It's about integrating into the system of oppression. But I wonder if you could talk to me a little bit about, Africana womanism and Black feminism, kind of like the difference and similarities between those two, and why or why not are they, quote unquote, compatible with Pan-Africanism, right? Like, where's the disconnect?
Well, our colonizers, our enslavers, our oppressors, came out of patriarchal, sexist, and misogynistic culture. And even though African people were enslaved, colonized, and are oppressed under that system, because if you have some what I call compounding characteristics, of compounding oppression. So Black people are oppressed, but women are also oppressed in this system. So if you're a Black woman, and disabled people are also oppressed. So if you're a Black woman and disabled, and queer, gender nonconforming people are oppressed. So if you're a Black woman, disabled, gender
Queer.
nonconforming, if you're poor, you know, if you're
Absolutely.
a migrant or an immigrant, refugee. So those are what you call compounding exploitations. And so when people come into the movement, a Black liberation struggle, and so many people say, well, it's about Black, and tell those people who have compounding characteristics where they suffer oppression that is intensified due to these other factors within the larger system. A lot of times they feel as though they have to leave the Black struggle because the Black struggle does not make a place for the women, the disabled, the gender nonconforming or queer, the refugees or migrants, or they tell those people they have to subordinate those other characteristics of themselves, of their identity, to Black. And so that type of stance leads to a lot of sisters and other people who have compounding exploitation to go and seek solidarity and redress for those other issues, especially when they experience compounding oppression within Black struggles. So a sister that comes and says, I want Black liberation, but within the Black liberation formation, there's sexism is tolerated and often promoted, and misogyny. There's no accommodation for non-neurotypical people or queer. So a lot of times the Black liberation struggle creates a point of division and a point of vulnerability, not acknowledging that Black is a core factor. As Garvey said, and I accept, race first. A lot of us don't understand that race first is something different than race only.
Of course, yeah.
So if you are a Black woman and you says, I am oppressed as a woman, I am discriminated against as a woman, you're not diminishing the Black liberation struggle. You're not deprioritizing or diluting or harming. You are contributing and strengthening. So as far as my problem with feminism, because I have a lot of writing, a lot of essays critiquing and condemning feminism. And it became disturbing after a while because I've been doing this long before the emergence of what you might call the manosphere. Or manism, the man movement. I've been doing this since the early to mid 90s and calling out feminism. But my problem with feminism is much different than a men's problem with feminism. I don't believe the bullshit about feminism harms men, reduces the men, feminists hate men, or all of that. My critique and problem with feminism is that it doesn't go far enough. Feminism is inadequate. Number one, it's not an adequate challenge to patriarchy and sexism and misogyny. Number two is that the feminist movement has always used as fuel the plight of African women across the globe, where white women will stand with Black women to legitimize their claims and their state and leave Black women in the lurch once the white women get what they want. So it's inadequate and it's exploitative of Black women. So that is my critique. Simply integrating women or giving women equal standing in a society, because every woman in this society could get equal standing and equal opportunity within the society. But that does not speak to imperialism, capitalism, ecocide, racism, ableism, and it just goes on down the line. And we've had too many examples of girl bosses, from Margaret Thatcher Hillary Clinton, Madeleine Albright, Golda Meir, and that's just women in politics. If we went into women in the military and women in the business, private sector, we see that women have the capacity to embrace and advance imperialism, racism, ecocide, genocide, on down the line. So simply giving women opportunity within this system and equal standing in this system is inadequate because it still leaves too many factors. What Africana womanism does is acknowledge the compounding oppression that Black women have as women and Black, that is a suppression, a double weight that they have to carry. But they also understand that women have to fight for their justice, their equality, their liberation in concert. And it has to resonate with and align with the larger liberation struggle and to fight against racism, fight against capitalism, the fight against global white hegemony. So that's all it is. It simply fills in the missing parts of feminism, the parts that feminism neglects. And even because I listed a bunch of white women to show that the what happens when oppressed people seek equality with their oppressors. Right. Nobody ever finishes that equation. Equality with your oppressor makes you equal to your oppressor. And there's nothing in that formulation that suggests that the oppressor has to make any change outside of giving you as many opportunities to be a parasite and an exploiter than they are. And we think that equality within an unequal system humanizes the system, when it actually 9 times, almost every time that I look, it dehumanizes those who are integrated in the system, as opposed to humanizing the system that the oppressed people are integrated into. Yeah. So it is a integrationist reformist movement as opposed to a liberation revolutionary movement. So that's my main problem with feminism. And I always acknowledge there are anarcho-feminists, revolutionary communist feminists, and there are some that are called, I don't think they're extremists. And I don't like that term because we never hear capitalist extremists or Christian extremists. So, but there are some factions of the feminist movement that are not ever really presented or acknowledged.
Absolutely.
You know, but I do think that women's oppression is definitely something that, because I've been in a room where Black organizations or leaders are calling for liberation of Black people and the removal of women's right to access to abortion, in the same sentence, in the same paragraph. Yeah, and they see no contradiction in denying Black women individual rights while you're fighting for our collective freedom. And they really think that some people see as path to freedom or an obstacle to freedom is the level of autonomy and mobility that women have secured through struggle, that giving them their autonomy is the threat or the main problem or the main obstacle to our collective freedom. Right. We got to put women back in the kitchen. We got to have black women barefooted, pregnant, and subordinate to her husband or father in order to get free. Yeah. So I don't think there can be a legitimate Black Pan-African or revolutionary organization that does not have a woman's component to speak to those issues.
Of course, yeah. Thomas Sankara used to talk about that a lot.
Yeah. So yeah. I am anti-feminist, but because feminism doesn't go far enough for women's liberation, not because I think it's gone too far.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
Or I criticize feminism from the left of feminism, not from the right-wing reactionary.
Yeah, I wanted to get into that. Yeah, because I hear you talk a lot about that. I feel like I'm seeing that. I'm seeing a lot of brothers and sisters, but mainly brothers that I speak to that, I used to think they were quote unquote conscious and everything, but now I'm seeing them turn to the right. It's like they're seeing that things aren't working when they're progressive. So instead of going more to the left, they're like, oh, fuck it, I'm going to the right. So they start pulling out, Candace Owens, they start pulling out Candace Owens clips, and they're like, look, she's saying the truth over here. Yeah. And things like that. And that's really
race traitors.
I feel like that's detrimental. So
that's treasonous. That's race traitors. But that's the problem where ideology, analysis, and critique have been degraded. There is a strong anti-intellectual component that has emerged and in the struggle. But this is not new. We have even Black Panthers. There are some Black Panthers that became right-wing reactionaries, denounced the Panthers, joined the Republican Party, or become Mormons and shit, just really go to the right. So this isn't something that just happened in our generation, but because of the nature of the social media and algorithms, it's the tide is I think is growing, that there are many right-wing reactionary and proto-fascist or full-blown Black fascists who claim they're revolutionary and they want what's best for African people.
Yeah, for sure. All right. We give thanks to Brother Diallo Kenyatta. This was part 1. Be on the lookout. Stay ready for part 2, which will come out Thursday, December 28th, 2023. Make sure you follow the brother at Diallo Kenyatta on social media. Go to AfricanWorldOrder.com and get you some fly merch, the aesthetics of liberation. And if you thought, this episode was helpful at all in any way, or you got anything out of it, please like, share, subscribe. Send it to a friend, send it to an enemy, post it on your socials, whatever you have to do. I definitely appreciate it. Go to VitalHoops.net. We are on Instagram at VitalHoopsPodcast. You can also write us, VitalHoopsPodcast@gmail.com. Let us know what you think, how we can improve, and who we should have on next. I appreciate you for listening, for watching. Vital Hoops is for the culture. Uhuru.